All right, everybody. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Happy Wednesday to you. Um, as far as just like nuts and bolts assignments, don't have many. But one thing it's important, very, very important to know that you have this quiz that is on Canvas that's due before our next class meeting, September the 29th, at 12:30. Uh, this is basically going to be our last class about Karl Marx. Starting on Monday, we'll be moving into looking at Emil Durkheim. You have a new writing assignment or a reading assignment, perusal assignment for Durkheim that'll be due first Monday of October. So without further ado, we should just kind of get into it. We left off last time in Marx's Capital, um, with the idea of the fetishism of commodities, which I think is a really powerful idea that we see probably more of today than Marx would have seen in 1867. So I think the fetishism of commodities is a very an idea with continuing relevance, maybe even with increasing relevance in the world that we live in. So I'm going to go to the screen share and pull up the reading. As usual, if the spirit moves you, feel free to chime in, ask a question, think of an example, share an epiphany, whatever it may be. The fetishism of commodities and the secret thereof. As I said at the very end of the last class, it's important to get this word fetishism right, because in today's day and age, of course, this has come to have a kind of sexual connotation that is not what Marx really meant in the 19th century. In the 19th century, this term fetishism had more associations with religion, and particularly with so-called primitive religions or indigenous religions, where people worshipped objects or plants and animals, things of nature, and would sort of, turn those things into like totems, like, totem poles, or still to this day, people talk about like their spirit animals and things of that matter, where basically like things were imagined to have supernatural or spiritual kinds of qualities, that they had some kind of extra thing that made them more than just like a bird or a lizard or a rock or a plant, that these were kind of venerated as having some sort of sacred, spiritual, or supernatural kind of quality. And Marx, in talking about the fetishism of commodities, is basically saying that in capitalist societies, people do the same thing with commodities, with things, with objects, that these things are produced by human workers in the labor process, but then people kind of fall under their spell. They come to worship or idolize these objects, these celebrities, the shoes or cars or purses or labubus, All these things would, sort of fall under what Marx is talking about as far as the fetishism of commodities today. That these things seem to take on an extra quality beyond their immediate use value, so that a car is more than just like a means of transportation. A car almost seems like to take on a kind of personality. I remember that when I was a kid growing up, my dad was way into cars, and my dad would buy like a new car, and he would give it a name, and he would like it was kind of, honestly, I thought it was kind of creepy, but he would like give it a woman's name, and like talk to it. Um, I didn't quite understand that as a child, and kind of still don't understand it today. But this is something that people do. They talk to their cars or their guns or their objects as if they had a kind of personality to them. And or likewise, like a pair of shoes becomes more than something to protect your feet. A purse becomes something more than just like to hold your stuff. These things take on these kind of extra qualities beyond what Marx calls their use value, to be something that almost like comes alive, um, with um, like a kind of an aura in this kind of way. So that explains this first sentence. This kind of a banger of a sentence where Marx says a commodity appears at first sight a very trivial thing and easily understood. Its analysis shows that it is, uh, in reality, a very queer thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. So, on the surface, in other words, at first sight, the commodity seems like a trivial thing, easily understood. It's just like a thing. But when we look deeper, it takes on this kind of extra strangeness. So when he says like a queer thing, again, that doesn't mean what it means today, that word queer. It would have meant just kind of like a strange or mysterious kind of quality, abounding with metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. So, like this kind of extra spiritual, you know, religious, in the sense of like theological, this kind of extra like supernatural kinds of qualities. So this is what he's saying is like, these things, they on the surface they appear trivial and mundane, just like things. But when we look more closely at the commodities, they take on these like almost like magical kinds of qualities. And here is where he kind of like gets into defining this thing that he calls commodity fetishism here in this very important paragraph. He says, a commodity is therefore a mysterious thing. Again, like he's using this kind of language of magic and mystery and the supernatural, and basically says like, well, on the one hand, it's just a thing that's made by people, so there's nothing kind of mysterious about that. It's just like the product of our labor, as human beings. But then something kind of becomes, the way that I put it in the comment is things become inverted, or topsy turvy, where these things start to seem like they rule over people, that people are ruled by things, by commodities, and by money. And so this is where things become topsy turvy or inverted or turned upside down. is where basically things are in charge and people do their bidding. And this is the kind of world that Marx is describing as a capitalist society. I can never tell if you guys can see my cursor or not, where I'm pointing to. This is kind of a long paragraph. Um, but the sort of sentence that kind of exemplifies this, you can see it, Jennifer? Okay. All right. So there, where they says, there is a definite social relation between men that assumes in their eyes the fantastic form of a relation between things. So again, like that the things are what's doing the action, and the people are almost like subservient to the things, that the relationships between people become relationships between things. I think about this like when I go to the store, something we all do. We go to the store, we buy a commodity, and we kind of, go up to the cashier, like, hey, how's it going? How's your day? Blah, 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 like a little small talk. Um, but the really important thing that's happening is like the exchange of the money for the commodity. And the people involved are just kind of holding, they're just temporarily possessing the money and the commodities. We're just kind of like the vehicles for the exchange of the money and the commodity. So the things are kind of in charge, and the people are just, kind of their conduits. And this is the sort of thing that Marx says becomes emblematic of a capitalist society in general. Is just like things and money are what rule. Um, as like the Wu-Tang Clan said, cash rules everything around me. This is like their, one of their first songs on the first album. And and basically that people are, like whereas in traditional societies it might be like king rules everything around me, or church rules everything around me, and now in a capitalist society it becomes like cash rules everything around me. Like cash becomes the new god, the new church, the new um and also the thing to be worshipped, you know, the thing that we spend our whole lives trying to acquire, right? And Marx is basically saying that this is crazy, that this is like a world upside down. This is the way things are not. This is not the way things are supposed to be. People are supposed to be in charge, and things are supposed to be our tools. But what he's saying is that in this topsy turvy world, it's like we are the tools. The people are the tools. The people are the things that are being um, manipulated and turned into sort of objects. So this kind of, as my note points out here, um, this kind of takes us back to our earlier discussion of alienation. Where Marx, makes this comparison with religion, and saying that like human beings, create and imagine these kinds of gods that they then become subservient to. They become subordinate to these things that they have created. And I compared that at the time to like the novel Frankenstein, the story of Frankenstein. Again, where human labor creates this monster that then terrorizes the those who have created it. And again, Marx is the way that I put it in the end of last class is that he's kind of trolling um, people in Western capitalist, modern societies by saying like, oh, you think that you're so much better than like these people that worship, plants and lizards and rocks, and you think you're so much more sophisticated than these so-called savages, um, who worship things and objects. and nature, but like you know, in you modern capitalist consumers do the same thing. You base, but it's just like you just worship money and stuff, and commodities. And so like you're kind of like no better than these people who you consider to be like primitive or savage, right? It's the same kind of dynamic. So when talks about fetishism in this kind of religious, kind of way, that's what he means, is that like so-called modern man is still like under the spell of these objects and things, in a way that is not very different than the way that the primitive, so-called primitive man was. So there's a lot in that going on in that paragraph. There's a lot to kind of break down. People have written whole, master's theses and dissertations and books about like this paragraph. You know, there's a lot. Every time I read it, I find more in there to to bring out, because I think it really speaks in many ways to our current condition. Um, so it makes a similar kind of description here of this kind of upside down world where things rule over people. And in saying that, where is it? Uh, yeah, it's here at the end of this passage that I've highlighted. The relations connecting the labor of one individual with that of the rest appear not as direct social relations between individuals at work, but what they really are: material relations between persons and social relations between things. So this whole like thing about like social relations between things kind of describes this experience. I'm describing when we go to the store and we buy something online, and the exchange of money for the commodity, or the exchange of debt for the commodity, whatever, the nature of the exchange is. It's the money and the commodities that are the really important things, and the people are just kind of incidental. The people are just kind of vehicles, or conduits who happen to be holding the commodity or the money or the debt, and they're just facilitating the exchange of the really important things that are actually in charge. Um, mm, so, what is it that kind of gives the commodity its seemingly magical character? In this paragraph, Marx is describing how the social process of labor that gives commodities their value is disguised from us. It's disguised from all of us. So how it is beyond the realm of our everyday consciousness. So when we buy stuff, we go to the store, we can't know and generally don't think about how we're exchanging value or where that value came from. And so the commodity is, therefore, he describes it as a social hieroglyphic, like a hieroglyphic, like these signs that like the ancient Egyptians would make that had all these kind of clues, but you had to read into them. They weren't like their meaning wasn't immediately apparent. So we kind of need like a science to decode the hieroglyphic. And Marx is saying we kind of also need a science to decode the commodity, and to decode the commodity in the sense of like a method that goes beyond the surface appearance in order to understand the way things really are. And to understand the way things really are means to go um, into the labor process, into the process of how these things work, because we don't see them on the surface. I go to my grocery store and I buy vegetables and fruits. I don't see the suffering of the migrant workers in the Central Valley who are the ones who are picking those fruits and vegetables, in the hot sun, now with like the threat of ICE raiding their farm, um, people who are literally going to have years taken off their lives by doing this kind of work. All of that is invisible to me when I'm at the grocery store, you know, even if I'm like a super motivated consumer, you know, like I consider myself to be like, I'm conscientious and I want to know, where things are made, and if they're made under super exploitative conditions, I don't want to buy them. But even someone like me is like, I don't know, like I don't know where these things come from. And actually, the companies in a lot of cases like don't want you to know. Like, there's a whole sort of campaign a number of years ago to expose um, Nike and these other apparel companies that were using sweatshop labor, so their products were being made, their shoes and shirts and apparel and stuff were being made by, like these teenage girls in Indonesia who are making like $2 a day, and like they're, being threatened with like rape and sexual abuse by their supervisors. And, they're just living and working in these awful conditions. And when people tried to expose those sweatshop labor conditions, Nike and these other companies pushed back real hard, and to basically try to make it impossible for people to know, where these things were being made or under what conditions. There's now these so-called ag gag rules where reporters, like journalists, are not allowed to take photographs of like factory farms, where animals are being slaughtered, or where workers are working in those slaughterhouses. They're not, you know, so in many cases, like you can't even know, you know, how the expression is like how the sausage gets made, right? Like you just can't know how the sausage gets made. They won't like let you. Um, so this is kind of Marx is talking about here, this dynamic in which these commodities, the role of labor in producing these commodities is obscured from us. It is disguised from us, and so the commodities take on this almost kind of magical quality where they may as well have just like dropped out of the sky with a price tag attached to them, or just come out of the ground. All we see when we go to the marketplace as consumers are these finished products and a price tag that's attached to them. Um, the whole labor process is beneath the surface. Marx calls it the hidden abode of production, like the factory that you're not even allowed to go in and see. Um, and so the product just kind of seemingly magically appears on the shelves of your grocery store or on, the Amazon website or eBay or wherever. This is a nice, like, kind of concise way of putting this just in one pithy little banger of a sentence. Um, their own social action takes the form of objects which rule the producers instead of being ruled by them. So this kind of topsy turvy Frankenstein like world. And again, here about what I was saying about the invisibility of labor. The fact that human labor is what gives commodities their value is invisible to the naked eye. So we don't see the labor that goes into producing commodities. We just see the commodity and its price tag. And so again, what Marx is trying to do is say that there's this hidden world of labor, this hidden abode of production, and all of these social relationships beneath the surface of the commodities. And his task is to try to expose those social relationships, to treat the commodity as a hieroglyphic that he can decode using these tools of science. Because the way that it sort of appears is like, if we don't see the labor that goes into making products, we think like the people that profit from them, the capitalists, are just these geniuses who just made all this money because they're just so brilliant. We're like, oh, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, are somehow these genius people, these entrepreneurs that have made all this money, and they deserve it because they're geniuses. And what we're not seeing is the labor in, the Amazon warehouse, or the labor in a Tesla auto factory. Those the value of everyday ordinary workers, who give the value to their commodities, that is like obscured from us, is hidden from us. And so we just get all the credit goes to the businessman. All the credit goes to the capitalist class, who then become venerated and worshipped, as almost like these idols, that we bow down to. And Marx is saying, like, the real secret here, the true secret, is that it's the workers who are creating that value, who are making it possible for those capitalists to reap huge profits. Um, and that's the thing that he wants to try to expose. He wants to bring to light. And then, as this passage kind of goes on, as this part of the reading goes on, he says basically, like, economists, he says that the categories of bourgeois economy, but basically today, the people that today we would call like economists, or people who work at the Wall Street Journal or Forbes magazine or whatever, that the problem with their description is that they only describe what's going on at the surface. They don't go into the hidden abode of production. They don't probe deeper into this labor process that gives commodities their value. They just stay on the surface level of things, and they report on the prices of commodities, and, like, oh, will the price of gold go up or down, or the price of oil go up or down? What is the housing market going to do? The problem with these bourgeois economists, as Marx describes them, as the problems with the categories of bourgeois economy is that it's just a superficial level of analysis. Not that it's necessarily wrong, or that it's wrong all the time, but more like it's a half truth. And the reason that it's only like half true is because they don't go beneath the surface to look at the labor process. Again, they treat these commodities as if the commodities just made themselves, like they just were just like thrown down from the heavens with a price tag attached to them. They don't look into the social processes behind their construction. And so that has this last, sentence here. It says the whole mystery of commodities, all the magic and necromancy that surrounds the products of labor, as long as they take the form of commodities, vanishes, therefore, as soon as we come to other forms of production. So, like other forms of production, I think he kind of means like in a post-capitalist society, in a socialist or a communist society, it will be more apparent to us that it is workers who create value and wealth, and that fact will be recognized in a way that it is currently not recognized. And he sort of elaborates a bit on it here. On again, when he uses this term political economy, you should think like economics, or like mainstream economics today. The people that you know work at the Federal Reserve, or that write for the Wall Street Journal, those sorts of people. And so he says that they've basically been incomplete in their analysis, and that they have not sort of investigated what lies beneath the surface, and more specifically, they don't look at the labor that goes into creating the value of commodities. How's everybody doing out there? I get a little tired of hearing myself talk, and it'd be great to hear a question. Catching up on what's in the Kai, I'm not sure what you asking here in the chat about a scandal with Shine or Kylie
It was when
Cosmetics.
you were, sorry, it was when you were talking about like the whole Nike scandal. And I was just like commenting on that. And then I remember hearing something kind of similar with Shein. I never know how to pronounce it, but I remember hearing something similar with that too.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else commented about the Kylie Cosmetics like labor issue as well.
Yeah, this has been going on for a while.
Yeah, they're
Most
just
people,
exploiting different parts of the world in their cheaper labor.
yeah,
Right.
right. So part of the problem too is a lot of these companies, they don't actually employ those people who are working in the sweatshops. They're employing what they call subcontracted labor. So they'll kind of hire a third party company, who is responsible then for producing whatever product they have. And if it's a third party company, then the corporation can just kind of wash their hands of it and say like, oh well, we didn't know, like, oh, we didn't know that these people were being, worked to death in these brutal conditions. Because technically, it's like they've just subcontract that out to this third party. That's what Nike started doing in like the 80s and 90s. Um, and Yeah, thanks for sharing that there's that documentary about this. This is a completely new thing to me as someone who's not a consumer of the cosmetics industry. Um, I'm hearing about this company for the first time. Go ahead, Kai.
I just feel like it's such like a moral dilemma, because there's just so many companies that, like even here in America, like that just don't treat their employees well, and then,
Mhm.
but at the same time, a lot of these products are necessities, so it's
Totally.
like, what do you do? Like, I feel like I'm also like a part of the problem, because I am giving them my money. So like I'm actively giving them like the green light to like, keep doing what they're doing. But it's like I also don't have a choice, so my hands are kind of tied.
Yeah, I do. I think we all experience that. I experience that myself. Um, you know, a lot of times, like you're even when you're trying to be an ethical consumer, like it's first of all, it's hard to get accurate information, and then second of all, like the whole thing is that these companies are kind of like competing with each other, and so they can't really like if they do things too ethically, if they pay their workers, a, a much higher wage than their competitor does, they're going to go out of business. And so the problem, it's kind of like the problem isn't like with, these individual companies. Some companies are definitely worse than others. Some companies are more ethical than other companies. But the thing is that the problem is the system, right? It's not the individual, companies within their system, within the system. It's the system itself, and like that, I think is the kind of the conclusion to draw here. And I don't, um, I don't think it's very productive to like shame people about their consumer habits. I never do that to people. I'm never like that guy who's like wagging my finger, like, oh, do you know, where your iPhone comes from? Or, like, I don't think precisely because this thing that, you said, Kai, was like, a lot of, we need these things. Like, I gotta have a phone and a laptop to do my job and to kind of exist. I need a car, like I need, these commodities, we kind of need them to live. And that's also Marx's point is that we're all thrust, whether we like it or not, into these relationships of dependence. Like where we're like literally dependent on these things for our lives, and we're dependent on our jobs for our lives, and we have to sell our labor power in the market and hope that somebody buys it so that we can get a wage so that we can buy these other things that we need to live. And that's just like the hamster wheel of capitalism that we're all kind of running in circles in. And so I don't think if we dug Marx up into 2020 in 2025 and brought him back to life, I don't think he would be like shaming people about their consumer habits. In a lot of cases too, we don't even have a choice. Like with the way that like Amazon has taken over distribution of online shopping, it's like I try not to use Amazon, but even for some things, like it's unavoidable. And or some things, I'll buy a product like from eBay, or, I think I'm buying something from an independent seller, and it'll show up on my doorstep in an Amazon box. And I'm like, God damn it, because they've basically monopolized the distribution networks for these sorts of things. Um, or like shopping at Walmart, or, you know, like, if you live in a small town, it's very likely that like the Walmart put all the independent mom and pop stores out of business. That they drove them out of competition. And so, it may very well be that like you like, for a lot of people, like, you have to go to Walmart. you know you really have to go out of your way and make a huge effort not to go there. So I always steer clear of like personally shaming people or wagging my finger at their consumer choices. I don't think that like consumers are really like the problem here. I think it's the, like I said, it's this system that's the problem. Mm, Sweet. Thank you, Empress, for um, getting calling our attention to this documentary. Yeah. Okay. Um, Let me close this out and go on now to what it calls the general formula for capital. This is a shorter section. It's from the fourth chapter of volume one of Capital. And he basically is describing here two kinds of lifestyles, the difference between the lifestyles of workers, who are the 99% of the population, who are basically just struggling to survive. And on the other hand, the capitalist class, the 1%, who are able to use their money to make even more money, as the expression goes, to spend money to make money. And so they're continually, you know, um, increasing their profits while workers are struggling to survive and, put food on the table and keep a roof over their head, and, all those kinds of expressions. And that, again, very much describes the sort of society that we live in now, where the 1%, I mean, like, there's always been a 1%, but the 1% has way more money than they ever have in world history, um, where the 1% has, are experiencing record increases in profits, where we're looking at, maybe like the first trillionaire in our lifetime. And at the same time, um, the vast majority of people are struggling, and are in many cases like falling behind, or falling into debt, into medical debt, or into personal debt, student loan debt, um, people who are struggling with rent and childcare, the cost of food, the cost of housing, the cost of medical care. All of those things are going up faster than people's wages. So that the commodities that people need to live are becoming more expensive than the wages that they're earning from selling their labor power. Um, so Marx, again, is kind of prophetic, like a prophet in the way that he described the world that we're currently living in. Even though he didn't have a crystal ball, he kind of saw the logic of this system, and it's really coming to fruition right now. Um, so he describes basically two circuits here in this paragraph. He introduces these two. This is the meaning of the word formula in this section, two formulas. And one is a circuit that he describes as CMC, where C stands for commodity and M stands for money. And so the basic idea is that the worker is stuck in the CMC formula, the CMC circuit, in which we have a commodity, which is our ability to work, our labor power, and we sell that commodity on the market to our employer in return for M, in return for money, right? In turn for a wage or a salary or tips or whatever. And then we use that M to buy more C, which is to pay our rent, to pay our medical bills, our child care, our food, our, labubus, all the commodities that we consume, right? So the idea of the CMC is that the worker never really gets ahead, that we're stuck in like this kind of hamster wheel where we're just constantly, selling our labor power, getting a wage. Hopefully that wage is enough to buy all the C that we need, all the commodities that we need. And so even in the best case scenario, like we're kind of stuck in place and just kind of struggling to keep up like a hamster in a wheel. The MCM, on the other hand, is the circuit of the capitalist. And the capitalist class starts off with a certain amount of money, a certain amount of M, and then they buy commodities with that M. So they buy a factory or they buy an office, or very importantly, they buy people's labor power. They hire employees, right? That's the C part. So they take that money and they transform that M into C in the form of machinery or office buildings or computers. But also the C stands for people, for people's labor power. The C, the commodity that they're buying, always includes at least some degree of human labor power. They have to hire people. And then they turn around and they sell that, the commodities that they make from those combination of workers, machinery, and buildings and stuff. And they turn those products and they sell them for money. So then that C becomes a new M. Now, the idea is that capitalists will not just sell that for, they won't just like have the same amount of M that they started off with, but that at the end of the circuit, they will have more money than they started off with. They will have what we would call profit. So they invest a certain amount of money into people and machinery and things, and then they get what business people call a return on their investment. They get 5% or 10% or 15% more than what they started off with. So while the worker is living this CMC lifestyle where they're struggling to keep up, the capitalist is continually accumulating more and more profit. And then the more profit they make, they're able to then reinvest that. They're able to hire more people. They're able to buy more machinery. They're able to expand their offices, whatever. And then they make even more money off of that investment. And so, whereas like the worker is stuck in the hamster wheel of like just running in place, the capitalist is in this kind of like upward spiral. Like the circuit is a continue, like it keeps going around and around and around and around, but instead of staying in place, it's going up. It's spiraling up. More and more profit is being made, more return on investment. And so this is the difference between the formula for the life of a working person versus the general formula for capital. So, yeah, Vanessa is not here, but Vanessa described this pretty succinctly and pretty well. The more money that is put in, the more they earn in return. It's a revolving circle in order to profit, right? So this is what is kind of going on. And so they sort of give these examples here of the MCM circuit. And here is where they introduce the idea that it's evident that capitalists, if they were just going to earn the same amount of money that they invested originally, then there would be no reason to go into business. The only reason that they go into business is with the idea that they're going to end up with more money than they started off investing. Otherwise, why would they do it? So they expect to end up more money with more money, which is to say profits. And so eventually they sort of describe it like down here as MCM primed, with that little apostrophe at the end of the second M, symbolizes in mathematical terms that there's more money at the end of the circuit than the amount of money that they started off, that they began the circuit with. And so then the circuit just keeps going and going and going. That M1 is then reinvested, and then more money comes out at the end of that circuit. So this is what they call surplus value. That capitalists earn surplus value in the sense that they create more value than they started off with. Now the question is like, how, where does this surplus value come from? How is it that capitalists are able to make more money than they started off with? He's like, it almost seems like magic, right? Like if you're an economist at the Wall Street Journal, you're just like, oh, this Jeff Bezos guy, what a genius. Like he started off with this amount of money, and like now look at him, he's, $500 billion or whatever. It must be because of the just innate genius of Jeff Bezos that he made so much surplus. And Marx's answer is like, no, the surplus value comes from this hidden, disguised exploitation of workers. The surplus value comes from the fact that workers are creating more value than what they're being paid at their jobs. And this is where this is where the profits actually come from. But it's under the surface, it's invisible, or it's disguised. And so therefore it's not easily seen. So workers are being paid like just enough to live. They're being paid this kind of minimal standard of living, or living wage. Their workers are being paid just enough so that they can get up and work the next day, just enough to survive and reproduce themselves. But they're creating way more value than that at their jobs. And so the capitalist class is like feeding off of that surplus value. There, in a way, it's kind of like a systematic form of theft, right? They're feeding off of the labor that is being done by their workers. And it's not that they're being paid nothing. It's not like slavery, but they're being paid less than what they're worth. And that's where these profits, that on the surface they seem magical, like they seem to sort of come out of nowhere, but in reality, they're the result of the fact that workers are being paid less than what they're worth in terms of the value that they create versus the wage that they're paid. And so there's this like relationship of exploitation that is baked into the cake of capitalism. The system, in other words, is not unequal because it's failing or there's something wrong. The system is unequal because it's fixed to be that way. Like the game is rigged. And on the surface, it seems fair. On the surface, it seems like, oh, we get paid, $25 an hour, or we get paid, $60,000 a year, because that's like what our labor is worth. That's like that's the market, um, being fair to everyone. But Marx is saying this is not at all the case. Is that workers are being systematically underpaid relative to the value of the work that they do. And if they weren't underpaid, if they weren't being exploited, then a business would have no incentive to hire them in the first place. The only reason that a business or an industry hires workers is if they can get surplus value out of them, is if they can get more value than what they have to pay them. Otherwise, like, why would you hire anybody? And so there is this relationship of exploitation that is kind of like hidden under the surface. So it's different in that sense from something like slavery. In slavery, the exploitation is very naked and visible and obvious, right? Like you don't need, it's not a hieroglyphic. You don't need a scientist to decode the relations of exploitation of in slavery. Like it's right there on the surface and it's visible. But in these conditions of capitalism, if you look at just the surface level of appearances, it seems fair. It seems equal. It's just like, oh, I go to the market and I, sell my labor power and I buy these products, and that's just like those are a fair price for things. It seems like like nothing's wrong with it. But beneath that surface, there is this relationship of exploitation um, that is baked into the cake, as they say here in Silicon Valley. Like it's a feature, not a bug. You know, Like it's part of the normal functioning of capitalism to be essentially like ripping people off, you know, and that a small sector of society, the 1%, are basically getting rich because they're um, systematically exploiting all the rest of us, and then taking credit for it, and then being like, "Oh, look at me! I'm Elon Musk. I'm a genius, you know, and I deserve to be a trillionaire." You know, this is the again, like the kind of topsy turvy, world upside down existence of a capitalist society. So that's sort of what's being described here. Um, the value. So um, here he compares. I like this the end of this passage. He compares the capitalist to like the story of the goose that lays the golden eggs. It's an old like fairy tale. You know, this idea that like suddenly, you know, just this goose just like starts producing gold, you know, like in this kind of magical way. Marx also describes it here in this last sentence as an occult quality of being able to add value to itself. So, in other words, this magical kind of thing, or something that seems like magic but actually isn't. But it seems like magic that the capitalist is able to just keep making more and more value, you know, just continually increasing their profits. That they're just, you know, it's like the goose that lays the golden egg. Just, you know, they just seem to have this occult, like in like a magical kind of thing, you know. Occult has this connotation of being like a dark magic, like a demonic kind of magic. So it has this kind of demonic ability to just keep making more and more and more and more money, as if it's the goose that lays the golden egg. But the reality beneath that surface level of appearance is that it's really the workers who are creating that surplus value that is then being stolen from them. You know, is being expropriated for them from them. And so this, you know, kind of wraps this up in the end by just saying like this is a continual process, is the word that Marx uses, is process, a circuit that never really stops. Um, like there's no point at which the capitalist is like, okay, I've got enough M, you know, I'm gonna like chill out and buy an island and retire, like I have enough money. Like that doesn't happen. Like there's no such thing as too much money for the capitalist class. And Marx thinks to some extent this is kind of crazy. This is kind of irrational. Like if you were Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, wouldn't you just like be like, you know what, I'm gonna peace out and just like, you know, just chill on my island and like not, you know, I don't need to be part of this rat race anymore. I got enough money for me, for all my kids, for all of my various, you know, I, I have more money than me or all my kids could spend in 10 lifetimes, you know, like it's cool. I don't need to do anymore. But no, these guys are like, no, 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 we need more money and like we need to go to space. You know, we need to like we need to occupy Mars. Is what, you know, that's the next thing. We've conquered Earth, and so now we need to go to Mars. there's a certain kind of like irrationality to it. Max Weber, when we look at Max Weber, will describe it in similar kinds of terms as like um, the rational pursuit of irrational ends. In other words, like a kind of a calculating, methodical approach to a totally insane objective. You know, the insane objective being to constantly maximize profits. Even if they take the whole planet down with them. Even if they create a climate crisis that destroys, makes human life unlivable on Earth. The pursuit of profit is the number one imperative above all, and it's just insane that is the case as a society, that these are the people that are running our world. I feel like I've gotten to the point of the lecture where I've become that ranting guy in the making a video in the car or something like that. It's just like ranting about how insane our times are. But the more I kind of think about it, and the more I wake up every day to these headlines and just what's going on in our world today, I'm just like, I can't stop shaking my head. Um, we only have like a couple minutes left. Thank you, Kai. It's nice to get some validation. Can anybody say anything or ask a question to talk me off the ledge here in the last 5 minutes?
No, just like a comment. Like I 100% agree with you. Like I think studying sociology has made me a lot more aware of
Hmm.
what's going on. And I don't know, it's pretty like, I don't want to say depressing, but it's just really, I don't know, I just feel like powerless. Like it's like, me and, obviously other people who know about it up against like the machine, and it's like
Yeah,
I just feel like like I don't want to say what can I do, but it's I don't know, I just feel like powerless.
absolutely. I totally hear you on that. And I feel that way a lot too. I suppose like we could sort of end this section, this class, and also this discussion of Marx, trying to find a more kind of hopeful note in what Marx says about like the power of struggle, that human beings never stop resisting, and that you know that we do have the ability to change the world if we organize and act collectively. Now, I know that this is true in theory, and I also wake up increasingly depressed with the idea that this is just not happening in our time right now. But the thing that does keep me going, is the hope that one day we will see this kind of thing, and we have at different points through history. In fact, in recent history, I mean, the Black Lives Matter demonstrations were, for example, one of the biggest waves of protest in the history of the world. Now, that doesn't mean that cops aren't still out killing people, because they are. Um, but my point, I think, has to do with taking hope in social movements. I think I commented to Precious in one of our discussions, or like in the annotations in the reading. I quoted the cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. She says, in fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And so I think that we have to at least take some hope that even if that isn't happening right now, that is the kind of thing that we can find many instances throughout world history in which this has been the case. 170 years ago, people thought that slavery was something that was never going to be abolished, and that we were just going to have to live with, and was just like a thing that what could you do? Like people felt powerless about that, and then all of a sudden, it was abolished. Yeah, go ahead, Kai.
Yeah, I just feel like how we're headed, with like AI automation taking so
Yeah,
many jobs and this country, because I just saw like a video, it was on this channel called Infographics, and they were saying how like what's happening is like these big corporations like Microsoft, because I one of them laid off a whole bunch of people, and what
yeah,
they're doing is that they're actually putting that money into AI investment, and I just can't help but thinking that how we're going and where we're headed, something's gonna have to change, like it's kind of being
yeah,
forced, like even if, and it's funny because I feel like obviously like these big CEOs and stuff, they don't want that, but I feel like I can't but feel like we're coming to a place where capitalism is probably going to be forced to end because we can't sustain, like, you know what I mean? Like how we're
yeah,
going, like if there are no jobs, how are people going to buy all their products, So I don't know. I feel like it's that I feel like gives me hope is that like where we're headed, I feel like just can't last and something's gonna have to flip.
yeah. And if that does happen, this is the kind of thing where Marx will have been right the whole time. That the bourgeoisie will have created its own gravediggers. That they will have created the very conditions of its own self-destruction. That they will have planted the seeds of their own destruction. I do think that this is a thing that we may see in our lifetimes at some point. Like with AI, it's not only throwing people out of work, but like sucking up all the energy in their data centers. All the water that's necessary to cool these data centers, just all the energy suck from AI is going to be environmentally unsustainable, much less, in addition to um, throwing people out of work in this way that you say. And so that maybe that may very well be on the horizon. And at that point, it'll be really up to people to organize and coordinate and to imagine a better world. All right, y'all. Um, keep your head up, as Tupac said, and I'll see you on Monday, or I'll sort of see you on Monday, and we'll start talking about Durkheim. Don't forget about your quiz. Okay, peace out, everybody. Bye.